Hey mates, welcome back. This is the circuit tracks, and in my last video I ran through a basic tutorial for how to make your first beat. In this video I'm going to go a lot more in depth, cover pretty much everything you see on the panel here, and give you a full tutorial for how to make use of pretty much every function this thing has to offer. So if you're a complete beginner, you might want to watch the previous video first, which should be up there, but just in case, I'll do a quick recap of some of those things. So double tap projects to get to packs, and you have all these different packs, which is basically a machine state including all your samples, synth patches, and projects. Choose the first one to be the factory content, which is what everyone with the circuit tracks gets. You can go into projects to choose between your projects. There's 16 demo projects here, as well as 5 that I've made, and on the next page is the one we made last video. So let's start with a new one. So let's start with the drum tracks. You can select the sample with the orange pads and sequence it in up here. Let's slow this down a little bit. So if you go into the tempo swing menu, you can use the blue knob here to change the tempo, and the orange knob to change the swing, which you won't hear yet, so let's add some hi-hats. Let's record this in by pressing a record button and playing it in live. Perfect. So now let's go into tempo swing and change the swing amount. You can hear what it does is it pushes every second note further forward to create this swing feel, or you can pull it back like this. So this can be used for a bunch of different styles of music to get different effects. The other thing in this menu, if you hold shift and press the clear button, it turns on the click, which is a metronome. And in the tempo swing menu, the 5th knob controls the volume of that click. Let's turn that back off. So now we can add in a snare. Let's record it in live. As you can see, when you record stuff in live, it's pink. The reason for that is because if you press and hold a sample, it will be pink when you place it down. So now you can hear they're playing this sample, but I can change the sample to something else, and they still play that snare sample. That's because these steps are locked to that snare sample. So no matter what I make the default sample, they'll always play that snare. This default sample will play on any blue steps, like that. So if you want to have multiple samples on one track, which you might want to do if you want to have open hi-hats and then they choke. So now we have a drum beat. Let's start with a synth section. But firstly, let's talk about scales. So up here in the top left, you have a scales button. So as you can see on the top, you have a keyboard with your white notes on the bottom and then your black notes at the top. And so you use the top 2 rows here to select the root note of the scale you want. So you could do C major. So you use the bottom 2 rows to select what type of scale you want. So this one is major, the second one, the first one is minor. The rest of them, I don't know. And then the last one is chromatic, which allows you to have access to the full keyboard. But obviously this takes up 2 rows, so you can only play 1 octave at once. Or when you press note expand, you get 2 octaves. But if you're in a different scale, this gives you access to 4 octaves. So let's choose a scale. Let's just do F sharp major. So you can go into preset to change the synth you want to play with. There's a bunch to choose from. Let's choose this one. And then you have these 8 knobs, which you can design the sound with. So let's record something in. You can press the 1, 16, 17, 32 button to give yourself access to 2 bars, and then turn on record and play. You're going to have to let it play through once before you try and record something, because if you try and record immediately, it will miss the first note. Now, as you can hear, I played this bass line in very sloppily, but it quantized it to the grid, because if you hold shift, you'll see record quantize is on. So you can toggle that, but it's on, so it quantized it to the grid. Now, some of these notes aren't as long as I would like them to be, so we can go onto the gate menu and control the length of each note to be exactly how long we want it. So we can see this one plays for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps before it gets to the next note. So let's make it 6 steps long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We can cut it off there. And also, as you can see, if you press the pad multiple times, it gets dimmer, so you can adjust the micro timing for the gate within each step. We can go to the second bar. And do the same thing. Perfect. So, the next thing I want to mention is micro steps. So, let's say we want to add a hi-hat ratchet. Let's do it on this step. So we want it to go like that. So we can go into micro steps by pressing gate, because in the sample tracks there is no gate, it's only micro steps. And then you can press the step you want, and you have these 6 pads down here. So these are the 6 micro steps, and there's 6 so that you can do triplets and stuff, but we're only going to use this middle one, like that. So then we get this nice drum beat and bass line. So for the rest of this video, I'm pretty much just going to run through all the buttons and tell you how to use them. So we've done scales, then you have these 2 arrow buttons. On the synth tracks, these go through octaves. And then on the MIDI tracks, they also go through octaves. On the drum tracks, this is how you scroll through your pages of samples. On the patterns, which we'll get into in a moment, this is also how you scroll through the 2 pages of patterns. In the mixer, it allows you to get between the 2 mixer pages. Let's go into the mixer. So you can change the level of each track in your song. And then if you press down, you get into the second page, which is how you can pan stuff around. Next, you can hear the kick drum and the bass line are both occupying the low frequencies, and they're kind of trying to take each other over. So if you double tap the effects button, you get into the sidechain menu. So what does sidechain do? Well, firstly, let me just show you. As you can hear, when the kick drum triggers, it takes the bass drum out of the mix temporarily, so that they're not fighting with each other over the low frequencies. So you can use a moderate amount of this. So you select the sample up here that you want to trigger the sidechain, and as you can see, you can have a different sample for each track, but usually you would use the first one because that's where you put the kick drum. Down here you have your 4 tracks, and you use the arrows to get to the other one. So we can use a little bit of sidechain to clear up the lower frequencies. Let's get into patterns next. So each pattern holds a set of notes. So if we take out all the drum patterns by going to an empty pattern, then we're just left with the bass line. Now we can also take out these because they're already empty. Then we can bring the drums back in. And as you can hear, when I press a pattern, you can press it early, but it won't actually go into it until it's quantized on the beat. So you can see it flashes for a little bit before it actually comes out, or before it actually selects that pattern. So let's say we want to start creating song sections. Let's say we want to start with just the kick and snare. We can go into the mixer and press shift and select one of these pads to create a scene, which is basically how you trigger. So say we select just a random set of patterns, press this scene, and we're immediately back to where we wanted. So instead of having to press a bunch of patterns at once, just press the scene and you're good. So then let's say we want to introduce the hi-hat and then the bass line. We can create 3 scenes and go through our song sections just by pressing these buttons. So back to sidechain, if you only press the button once, you get into the effects. So you have 8 reverb options down here and 16 delays. So each delay is a different time so each of the delay options is just a different delay time, and the reverbs get increasingly like just increasingly reverb. So you can select one delay time for the whole track. And one reverb. So each track can have a different intensity for the effect, but you can only select one delay time for every track and one reverb. This white button down here brings all the effects in or out at once. So now let's talk about the setup menu. If you hold shift and press save, you get into the setup menu. So you can, in here, you can select your different tracks and then the top 2 rows control the MIDI channel. So there's obviously 16 pads here, so it's track MIDI channel 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 16. It won't let me select channel 2, 3, or 4 because the rest of the synth and MIDI tracks are already occupying those. So if I move synth 2 down to something else, then synth 1 can take over channel 2. But I don't want to do that, I want to leave it on the default settings. And also, all the drum tracks share one MIDI channel, and by default it's on channel 10. And also nothing can be on channel 16 because that's reserved for project changes or something. Down here you control the clock speed of the analog sync output at the back, which you probably won't need unless you're working with like a pocket operator or something. It can also be used with the Korg Volca series, but if you're going to do that, you might as well just use the MIDI. This pad controls the brightness. There are just 2 options. And then down here, you can control whether to send and receive different MIDI events. So in each group, the left one is to receive and the right one is to send. And I think it goes notes, MIDI CCs, which are the knob values, and then these two I can't remember. I'll put a screenshot of the manual, but one of them is project changes, I think. Anyway, once you've decided your settings, press play to confirm them. Also, you can save your tracks by just double pressing the save button, and then you can press save and tap a new location to put it in a new location. And then also when you select a pad for a project, you can hold clear and clear that project, but you can't clear any other projects because it's to prevent you accidentally deleting a project you wanted to keep. You can also use clear to get rid of scenes and to clear patterns. I'm not going to actually clear anything that has stuff in it, but that's how you do it. You can also clear a note on the sequencer. So now let's go down this menu. So note is just to access your live playing mode, and then when you press it twice you get to expand, which just gives you more octaves. Then you have velocity. So you can use this to change the velocity of each note, which is just the loudness basically. So we can turn this note way down and then you barely hear it, or you can turn it back up. And then you can see there's a second function, but you can't double tap it to get to that. That's because it's a shift function. So every time you see text written above one of these smaller buttons or on the bottom of the bigger buttons, you can press shift to get to that second function. For the ones on the top, so these 4, you can only press shift to get to it, and that's the same for record quantize and also for fixed velocity. For all of those, you can only press shift to get to it. Oh, and also patterns view lock, you can only press shift to get to it. But for the rest of them, you can just double tap it and it will get you to the second menu. So what is fixed velocity? Well, by default, how hard you press something will change the volume of it. So if you turn that off, if you go into fixed velocity, that response is no longer there. It will play the same volume every time. This could be useful if, say, you don't want to make all that noise. If you need to be quiet while you're making something, you could just play it in softly and then edit the velocity afterwards. So then we get down to gate. So as I mentioned, on the synth tracks, gate is used to change the length of each one, and then you can go into micro steps. So the micro steps are used to slightly adjust the timing. On the synth tracks, you can only have one micro step for each note. You can't have you can't have multiple. You can't have multiple selected like you can on the drum tracks. Like for example, this one. You can have multiple selected, not just one. Then we move down to pattern settings. So here, you can control the start and end of the pattern. So say you want to do some polyrhythm or polymeter stuff, you can, this light is the last note in the pattern, so say we select this one. It will go back after that point, which doesn't really work very well in this case, but it could if you specifically want to do polyrhythm stuff. Also, if you hold shift, you can change the start of the pattern. So then you can make the pattern just be one note long, which is probably a weird decision. Anyway, then these 8 orange pads are used to control the speed of that particular pattern relative to the rest of the project. So if you want to slow down the bass line, you can press this one to get to half speed, or this one to get to double speed, and then this one's a quarter, and then the ones in between are triplet divisions. So that doesn't really work for the bass line, but say we want to make the hi-hats be triplets, well, we can do that. We just put it on a triplet option, and they're triplets now. The last thing down here is the playback order. So you can have it play normally, or backwards, or ping pong, which means it plays forwards and then backwards, or random, which can be used for some generative stuff. As you can see, if I toggle something, it doesn't take effect until it gets to the end of the bar, so that even simple changes such as this won't be affected until it can be quantized on the beat. The shift function or double tap function for this is probability, so you can change the probability that each note will even happen. So if I turn this down really low, this note is really unlikely to actually get triggered, but you can see it did there. So by default they're all the way up and every note will trigger every time, but this is another generative tool you can use to have each note only trigger sometimes. Speaking of generative tools, I think we have one more thing to go through, so let me just save this project and go into another one. So I'm not going to spend too much time on sound design or anything, we're just going to create something simple. So let's just put a couple of notes into this pattern. Now if we press shift and duplicate, as you can see the text there is to mutate it, and what does that do? Well, it's like the random play order, but the thing about the random play order is you'll never get it to repeat the same thing over. So what mutate does is it takes the notes you have and randomizes them, but this is permanent. So it will randomize them actually in the pattern. It won't just play them back in a different order. It will randomize the order of them in the actual recorded pattern. So that way, it will be randomized, but it will be the same version every time. So currently we have this. Let's press mutate. I think that's interesting. Let's just add a kick drum so we have some rhythmic context. That's not too bad. Let's try something new. I think that one's actually pretty good. So yeah, you can use mutate to come up with some interesting rhythmic options. So you can put in the notes you want. And the other thing is, say like if you want it to mostly be one note, you can like I've got 4 of the same note here. I'm and then I'll just put in a couple of other notes. So now it's mostly going to be this first note, which should be C. Yep. So then let's mutate it. And now it's pretty heavy on this note. So you can not only choose which notes, but by choosing the amount, you can also choose how how much of each note there are. A couple more things to talk about for the drum track. The preset menu just gives you access to 4 rows of samples instead of 2. And then also, what do the knobs do in the drums? Well, this is how you edit your samples. So you can change the pitch with the first one. You can change the decay to get it nice and snappy, add some distortion, or a high pass / low pass filter. So you can go up to high pass or down to low pass. Like that filter, there's another very similar type of filter, which is the master filter. So you can go up to high pass or down to low pass. So this is basically the same type of filter as this one. I think it's called a DJ filter, where you have access to high pass and low pass in one knob. This can be used to slowly bring the intensity up, and also you can use the high pass for transitions. And there's also a very noticeable notch in the center, so you can tell if you're just turning it, it locks when you're in the center. So it's very easy to stop and get it right on the middle. And also you can tell by the lights. It goes blue when you're on either side, and it gets brighter the more filtered it is. And then when you're in the middle, the light is, I don't know if it's off or it's just white, but you can tell a difference. Oh, there's one more thing. Okay, so if you turn it off, and then I think you hold shift while you're turning it on, you get into the advanced setup menu. Now I can't remember all the features for this. So you can see you don't use the pads here in this menu, and there's only 3 options. So the effects sidechain option controls the master compressor. The note expand option, I can't remember, I'll put an annotation here. And then the duplicate one, what does this do? Well, as I mentioned before, the MIDI outputs on the back can be configured. One of them says through, so that can be either a throughput of the input, so you can plug in a MIDI controller to this and also have it go through here into something else as well. But you can also use the throughput, you can also use the MIDI throughput as a second output. So if duplicate is toggled on, the throughput will act as a second output, or if it's off, it will act as a throughput. By default, it's on duplicate, which means it will be a second output. I think that's it. That's all the features in the circuit tracks. If I missed anything, I'll put an annotation here. Hopefully you found this tutorial helpful and you can learn more about how to use your circuit tracks. If you did find it helpful, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any comments, feedback or suggestions, make sure to leave them in the comment section below. And other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.